Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Steeple Report. Today, we're really happy to welcome Bob Groves. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, buddy. Glad to be here, of course.
I uh, I always struggle to pigeonhole you as one thing or another in terms of a title because you've done different things in your life, and and I'm intrigued by what you're doing now. Why don't we go to the genesis story of Bob, and why don't you just maybe introduce yourself to the viewers, a little about where you grew up and some of your history and what you went through to get to where you are today.
Okay. Well, from Ohio, but grew up here, Virginia Beach area. Moved here when I was really young. My dad was military, met my mom in this area. So that's how we got to Virginia. Been back to Ohio one time, so not much memory there. Um, Went in ministry when I was fairly young and was in ministry almost 30 years. And transitioned out of that for various reasons and started a coaching and consulting company about 6 years ago. And so I do corporate training, leadership training, consulting, and then also do a lot of one-on-one um, life coaching and marriage coaching as well. And because of technology such as this, I'm able to have clients across the country and even in Canada. COVID didn't throw me off my game too much because I was already virtual in a lot of capacity. So, yeah.
So you were a pastor for, if I remember correctly, well over 20 years, maybe 25, 27 years.
27 years. Yes, sir.
And at the peak, your church that you led was, I guess, considered a mega church. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. The first church we pastored, we started with 11 people
Well,
and it grew to thousands. It was at the time in the top 2% in the country,
well.
for sure. Yeah.
And what led to the transition out of that world and into kind of where you are today?
Yeah. Just went through some really bad decision making, had a failure, and literally was removed from that spot in 30 minutes. It was over. And um, that's over, well, right at 12 years ago.
Okay.
And so I had to rebuild everything that I knew. And so that included our marriage, our family, life, business, so forth. Actually dabbled back into ministry for a little while. And I think I just carried something pretty heavy on my shoulders that I could never accept, that I was supposed to be in that spot again. And so I transitioned back out of it. But even our second church, you used the word Genesis a while ago. That was the name of our second church. And
Hmm.
it grew to hundreds actually, but I just couldn't get past Bob and felt like I needed to move on and take my platform elsewhere. And that's what I do today.
And so that um, experience led to a lot of introspection and discovery about who you were, where you wanted to go. Um, Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what kind of took place, not,
Yeah.
you know, ultra, not the ultra personal, but about the journey that you took to
Yeah.
arrive at the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously, to get back where things were just going really south, really dark time in my life, was ready to even I walk on the planet, got in a really dark pit. And I had to figure some stuff out, and my wife and I, as well as I, went to counseling, and I'll never forget my first question. I asked the counselor, how could I do what I've done? And he made sure I wanted to hear the answer. And then his answer was very honest, but very, there was no cut in his answer. It was straight shot. But I needed it. And it was from that I started a personal journey and realized some things I had struggled with since I was about 10 years old. Actually had I was 45 at the time, 12 years ago. So for 35 years, I had just really battled some things that kicked my tail and got away from me that I was able to go free of 12 years ago. And so when I pivoted, Richard, into corporate training, leadership, and I've been fortunate. I've worked with some really cool companies. I realized I was meeting men like I used to be, executives who really had it going on professionally, but were really bankrupt internally. And I came home one day and I said to my wife, I said, I am meeting me everywhere. And I said, I've got to do something to help these guys, because I know how desperate it can be to put on our game face and be successfully in one realm and be broken in a way no one even knows about. And so I hired somebody to help me write a program called Man Alive. And I started taking executives on 3-day retreats that they paid significant money to go on them, but it was all because of trying to figure out their internal self. And I did that for a while. When COVID, I had to pivot a little bit, but I'm actually like getting ready to reintroduce Man Alive to the world again. I don't think by tomorrow, but possibly by tomorrow. Been really chewing on some focus and stuff, because who is it? Thoreau, that says, most men lead lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I think that's true. And so I'm on a mission, different platform, but on a mission to help as many men as possible figure out who they really are, what's going on inside. Because I believe, Richard, I'm old school a little bit, but I believe when a man gets it right, it affects his home, it affects his world, it affects the world. And I want to help more men get it right than I ever have. I'm 57, so I only got about 40 more years to do this, I figure. So.
God willing, and the creek don't rise.
And I'm fortunate. Like I still do corporate training. I work with a lot of really cool places, leadership, but my heart, my passion is to affect people's lives in deeper ways. The book behind you, The On Purpose Person.
You were the one who turned me on to that book, so I was going to mention that.
Well, that's an annual read for me. I'm actually connected with Kevin now, and we chat every now and then. And the author of the book, that's an annual read. I have been doing 18 years, setting 7 goals every year. And that's what kind of has me refocused, repurposed on some things this year that we're talking about. So
you mentioned when you were in counseling that the answer the counselor gave you was brutally honest. If anybody asked me to describe Bob Groves, I think I would probably use those 2 words. You yourself are brutally honest, but one of the things that I pick up on that you repeat constantly is about being brutally honest with ourselves. And that if we're not thinking about, and being honest with ourselves, then the next steps are near impossible, because we're building on fallacies and we're not facing reality. Is that an accurate depiction?
100%. There used to be a rumor on my staff: if you wanted someone to be nice with you, go meet with, and they name someone else. But if you want to deal with the truth, go meet with Bob. And and it's an interesting twist in our lives. Like, Scripture even says truth makes us free, and yet we will run from it and paint it and put cologne on it and do everything we can. And yet, like the day that guy answered my question straight up, I'm telling you, here's the image I was given. I wrote about it just recently. I saw a label like in the back of your shirt. And what I heard in my spirit was, the world has labeled you, and I can cut that out of your life. And that's exactly the hope that was given me, called an epiphany, theophany. But immediately I knew, by hearing the truth in a way I had never heard it, that I could go free from that. And I called my wife. That was my first session at counseling. And I called her, and I was actually broken. I was crying. And I said, let me tell you what he said. And it was hard to hear. And then I said, but let me tell you what I felt like God said. And that's why, I think, along with the brutal truth, Richard, one of the things that I hear about me and connecting with men is, for whatever reason, Bob is a safe place. And people feel like they can be honest with Bob. They can talk to Bob. And if I ever quit keeping all the secrets I know about people, it would
Well,
be a
as
hard
the
day for
Catholics would
somebody.
say, that stays in the confessional.
Well, there's a lot in the confessional. How about that, man? Yeah.
It's interesting. Something you said that reminds me of. I follow this psychologist, Jordan Peterson, and he's had a mega blockbuster book, 12
The
Rules for
12.
Life.
You turned
And
me on to that book.
yeah, and he talks about, well, he particularly talked about this one thing in an interview that he once did, where he was challenged about why it's important for men to be strong. And he made the point similar to yours, is that when men are complete and strong and confident and doing the right things and honest with themselves, that they are better for their world, better for their relationships, better for their company, whatever it is in their sphere, they are better prepared to do it. And why would women want anything less? And I
Yeah.
thought that was a good point, that, even though, I don't know if you're challenged the way he is that oftentimes his audience is disproportionately male. And he said, that's okay, because if I build up the men, the women are the recipient of the prize. And
Hmm.
that kind of sounds like kind of a similar thing that you're kind of saying.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. To go a little further than he with his question, like, I really believe it's placed within women to have that, strong person in their life. Um, and so they may not even know to ask for that. But I think when they have the opposite of that, a weak person, uncertain, insecure, or whatever, they know that. They may not be able to put their finger on it. Like, you need, they may tell him he needs to grow a pair or something like that, but they don't really know, like, the foundation of what they're trying to touch on.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important point. What are the principles in your speaking and coaching and executive coaching that you walk through, that you find to be the pillars of what you're teaching?
Yeah. One is from the very first session, Richard. Like, first off, you're my client for a moment. Richard, tell me, 90 days from now, what will make us high five each other like never before? Because if you don't know what you need to get out of it, it's that whole ready, fire, aim, right?
Right.
So being very clear on the goals, but then I have an assessment that all my clients go through, that it's a very comprehensive, where are you right now? As opposed to, Richard, how's it going? And we'll
Right.
talk about, in one answer, it means everything. My cat's good, my dog's good, finance, I'm good. But when you start looking at 9 areas of your life and you can't fudge, that is the beginning of that. Let's get honest here. Let's get real. People, I mean, really, like, when someone works with me in that capacity, or yourself, if you do this, they're not hiring us to hear what they've always heard before. They've put some stuff on the line because I needed Paul to be honest with me that day. People want that because we live in such a, even more so, soft, vanilla, generic world. And so yeah, but that's the beginning of it. And it's five phases we go through. Authenticity would be another one, of, like, brutally honest. It would be another word that I think when you align to who you authentically feel created to be, like there's no hidden stuff going on. I think you show up more courageously, more confidently. I think you have clarity. And so that's another pillar. Like, let's align to what's, get rid of the dissonance that's inside you.
Right. I know one word you just used in a sentence, but it's a word that you often focus on, which is courage.
Mhm.
Why don't you unpack what you mean by that? Some people might
Yeah.
think that's, just, standing up in front of a bully, but you mean something deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually try to help clients differentiate confidence and courage, because a lot of times we'll use the word confidently in the wrong place. Courage precedes something. Confidence is a byproduct of something. And they'll say, I'm not confident doing that. Well, if you've never done whatever it is, you're not going to be confident. You've got angst and all of that. Courage is the willingness, whether it's to be brutally honest, to maybe answer a question I've never been asked before, like I did with Paul, and hear the answer. Courage, I think sometimes, depending on what side of the track you grew up on, facing the bully is easy. However, facing yourself or facing some things, it's like, I've done all I can to run from what you're asking me right now, and to give you an answer maybe I've never let come out of my mouth before. It takes courage, but I can't tell you how many people, Richard, I've had, as soon as they talk that out, like, oh God, just talking about it makes me feel better already. Because typically it just ruminates, right? And we chew on it maybe for decades. And we think we're the only one. We can't believe this, and all. And when we talk it out, and Bob or Richard doesn't respond like, oh my God, we just hear it. It's like, okay, what are we going to do about it? And so I think it takes courage. And there's this pseudo success that we have in our society, to where if you have the car, you have the boat, you have the bank account, it doesn't matter what you have behind the door of your house. You could have a broken marriage, have no relationship with your kids, just drink all night long. But as long as out there, and that's miserable. It could be sex, drugs, rock and roll. It doesn't matter. But if you don't get this guy right, it's just not a happy journey. And fulfillment happens inside out, as you know. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because as you and I have talked about in the past, I've done extensive reading on coaching as well as leadership, and what are the attributes that are brought out. And there are different philosophies. There's the strength-based philosophy, build on your strengths, which is a very coaching-oriented way of doing things. Is discover and maximize your gifts and talents and utilize them to their fullest, and make plans going forward, leaving counseling to looking backward and looking at why
Yeah.
you have brokenness in different areas. Sometimes I think the two converge, and that's where the conflicts in the disciplines comes. It's one thing to build on strengths. We all have strengths. But sometimes I find that the broken parts can overwhelm or get in the way, short circuit what you're trying to accomplish with your strengths. And so I've come to the conclusion that it has to be a hybrid of the two. Maybe they're not
Yeah.
done in the same environment. Maybe coaching remains, present and future, and counseling remains, present and past. But
Yeah.
I've kind of come to the idea that, you have to look at your weaknesses so that they don't undermine your strengths.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree 100%. Like a couple of thoughts come to mind. One, I think all of our strengths have an inherent weakness. And you have to be aware of both sides. Otherwise, you're blind to something. And like, if I have a propensity to some weakness, for me to not want to be accountable or honest with that, it's going to get me. Yeah. Or another book I put in a lot of men's hands is Bo's Cafe, BO' Cafe. And the first time I read that, Richard, to me, what it said was, don't get good at consequence management.
Hmm.
Because what happens is, if I just keep hiding my weakness, but I almost get caught, I almost get busted, it almost gets me fired, whatever it is, but I get smarter. If I don't get honest with it, it's just a ticking time bomb. Like, it's getting bigger inside me, and I won't manage that forever. And I think that's part of being honest with yourself and working through your weaknesses as well as your strengths. Because when I work with somebody, and this is from my own experience, I didn't want to be sitting here on this interview saying, I still have that, I just manage it better.
Right.
Like, that's, to me, that's total bull crap, and sadly, I think too many people just learn a lot of crazy coping mechanisms. And every now and then the vat boils over, and it's like, oh, thank God I only did that once this year or once this quarter, as opposed to, why not go free? Like,
Right.
why not be done with it? And I don't think everyone, or a lot of people, I don't know which, even believe you can go free of stuff, because the tenure, I've struggled with this for 10 years, 12 years, 18, 30 years. And it's like, no, man, you can go free. Part of the reason you stay stuck is your belief you can't go free. And so I don't teach coping mechanisms. I teach, like, let's figure out what the root of this is and get past it. So you don't have to be a better manager of your bull crap. Like,
Right.
I would hate to be who I was 13 years ago. Be very honest. I would, I'd be living in so much turmoil, knowing like, you are going to F your world up again. You're going to do it, man. It's just a matter of time. As opposed to, no, I'm good. Actually, I'm good.
Yeah, I I had a boss who, you remind me of him in many ways, and he had an
Did you like
expression.
him?
I did, actually. I learned a lot from him. But he was also from Ohio, so I don't know if there's something there. But
It's a good
but
place to be from.
one of his favorite expressions was, "Leave your baggage on the carousel."
Yeah.
And the meaning, I think, is somewhat obvious, which is, if you carry that same baggage around everywhere you go, it's always going to be with you, and it's always going to get in your way.
Yeah.
It's always going to be something that you're lifting. And
Yeah.
and I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts, because it's my feeling that, like you're saying, people have such a hard time actually facing and then letting go what
Yeah.
becomes baggage. And I don't know why that is. To me, it's natural that you have to look it square in the eye and just let it go, because if it stays with you, it just eats you up.
Yeah. So for me, I carried my past for a while, and it was incredibly difficult. And I would even say, I can't forgive myself. Can't forgive myself. And I heard a speaker, you may have heard him, David Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm.
He was teaching on the radio one day. I'm not a follower, wasn't a follower of his, just
Right.
reasoned through, and I heard, and he was talking about your past. So I stopped. And he said something that first I didn't believe him. He said, the Bible never teaches you to forgive yourself. And I'm like, that's bull crap. Like, it definitely does. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't teach you that. He said, what it teaches you is to make peace with your past.
Mm-hmm.
And so I listened to what he talked about. And I'm telling you, Richard, like, that suitcase, that thing I carried, I learned through what he taught that day how to put my past down. And here's what it was. Like, one, make peace with your past. And there were steps, very, sequential things that he recommended, and I studied and learned how to do. And then how do you get to where your windshield's bigger than your rear view mirror? Because
Right.
so many people, it's the other way around, and you keep looking back. And I heard this illustration years ago where it was three young boys in a field of snow,
Right.
and they're going to run from A to B. And one of them, while he's running, he just keeps looking back, right? And every time he looks back, he veers left or right. One of them, when he's running, he's looking down right where he is. And of course, he's meandering a little bit. And one of them is running toward the oak tree. And his tracks across the field are like an arrow. And I just always keep that in mind. It's like, remember, you're going somewhere. Like every time you look back, you drift. And I thankfully learned how to quit carrying my past. And um, did you ever see the movie The Mission with Robert De Niro?
I did. Yeah.
Well, you remember he was carrying this man's armor, right? That it was his friend. It was his penance. And there's this moment, and believe it or not, Robert De Niro's a missionary in the movie. Maybe the closest he ever got to any role like that. But anyway,
Reserve comment.
a great movie. But there's this moment in the movie he's going to die because of carrying the past, the penance. And this person, if you remember, runs over with a knife, and everyone's watching. They think he's going to kill De Niro. But instead, he reaches back and cuts the rope off, and this armor falls off the cliff. And man, it is such a heavy moment. But again, that's an image in my mind of putting the baggage down on the carousel, because I've worked with guys who we can carry past, and you know them too, to where, man, you just don't have, that's another management skill, and you don't have to manage it. You go back a generation of ours, and, you just work your ass off and you provide for the family, and we're good. You carry all your stuff. You don't talk about yours. I don't talk about mine.
Right.
And we see how damaged families are from that type of deal. I mean, there's validity in dealing with truth. There's validity in getting rid of the suitcase or the baggage. And yet, again, I just think so many of us are afraid to have those conversations.
Yeah, I look back, and to some extent it might be generational, but I think it's also kind of men in general. We tend to want to be a bit stoic, and what I've found is that the more I am that way, the more walls build up between the ones I love, because I'm not letting them in and seeing the things that pain me, the things that hurt me, that damage me, and I'm just pretending that they're not. And that wall just gets higher and higher the more you're keeping it inside.
Yeah, 100%. Like we're good at getting around and having a drink and burping and talking about nothing. And yet our hearts scream for a real connection to where we can just be ourselves. The people that study us out there say our greatest desire in life is to be loved for who we are, and our greatest fear is that we won't be. And when you can wrestle both of those down and be yourself, be authentically you, and be okay with who's in and who's out, there's an incredible freedom in that. And that was part of what I wrestled with. Like, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. And once I got past all of that 12 years ago, Bob has learned how to show up with all his good, the bad, all of it, and be okay with being not okay.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were talking about, what the Bible does and doesn't do. One of the other things that I get from my faith is that, inherently we are children of God. He instills in us, our gifts and talents, all the things that we know as Christians. And so often I think what happens is that the world, piles on, which it's apt to do. As you go through life, you have experiences that are not all positive. And
100%.
Sometimes people's attention gets diverted from what their purpose is as a child of God. And rejoicing and benefiting from the gifts that so I think, on purpose, is one of the things I learned from you when we first met. And I think it's so important because it's so easy to get off purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree. Yeah. I think, I think a lot of people would even struggle answering that. What's your purpose? Why are you here? And yet there's probably a second class to where it's like somewhere within, so you like one part of your life and don't like the rest of it or something. And a good old church term, I'm just bearing my cross. And it's like, no, you don't understand that term if that's what you think is happening. So,
Right. So when you're, I think there's probably a difference in the way you address individuals versus the way you address groups. So I think we've heard a lot of the direct one-on-one kind of messages. When you're talking organizationally, which I think, this could be beneficial to people in the corporate America, it also be important for pastors, because pastors, as we all know now with COVID and everything, and struggling to keep their churches afloat, they need some words of encouragement and some advice. What would you tell such leaders?
yeah, specific to pastors, I work with one of the largest churches in this area, by the way, with their executive staff and their entire staff. And I was telling one of them the other day, I don't know if they like me telling them, I'm just glad I'm not in ministry in this. Like, it's got to be brutally hard because I'm such a people person. Like, I get energy in the room.
Right.
And I teach corporately through a webinar now. I don't even see a person. And so I'm just glad I don't have to navigate that. But at the same time, one of the benchmarks of ministry for me, Richard, was God saved me out of a really deep pit. I was a mess. I was straight up heathen, hellion. And so when God called me, like Jensen Franklin, if you know that name on TV, like I met him a couple of days after I got saved, and I was the drummer and he was the sax player at a church. And he and I just had some neat moments early on. And so when I felt called into this, most churches, 90% plus, now this may have edged a little bit since, are not geared for the not yet convinced, not yet converted. They're geared for everyone who already knows the answers. And I was the exact opposite. And so I'm letting the cat out of a bag here, Richard.
All right, everybody, this is breaking news.
Every sermon I wrote was for one person. His name was Mike, real person. And I would have this conversation in my head, like, if you're going to talk about John 3:16 or Acts 2 or whatever, like, what would Mike ask? What would he be challenged with? And so in this, like, I think we have an incredible opportunity. I don't know the answer to what ministry format context should look like, but the opportunity, the desperation of humanity right now is off the charts. I mean, we see it in the news every day. And, I think more than ever, the message of hope, gospel, the good news. And yet at the same time, I think you have to be very comfortable with the skeptics, the real questions people are asking, and not give maybe a decade ago or 2 decades ago you could get away with, because this world is whack job, man. And I think pastors that in the pulpit context, the speaking, that will speak the message but wrestle with the big questions, I think will have inroads. And then third one, I think, inherent in the question is, if pastors don't have someone like you or me in their life that they can be brutally honest with if they're, doing whatever, because ministry will isolate you and you can't talk to your board. You can't talk to another pastor. Like when I got in trouble, everyone wanted my freaking job. Like my best friends now were trying to take my job instead of trying to make sure I didn't end my life. It's a total crap show, man. And so for any pastor in this, I would imagine financially it's harder, right? There's a lot of pressure on ministry right now. And every pastor and spouse needs a friend, needs an outlet, needs to be able to say, I'm struggling with porn, or I started drinking, or I did whatever. And, we don't want to think like that. But the moment we're hiding it is the moment it just becomes something else. So you got to put your oxygen mask on first in ministry. And I think a lot of us fail that.
Yeah, I haven't posted it on the site yet, but I have just earlier in the week interviewed Dr. Charles Stone, and one of his books. He's a pastor and he's a neuroscience expert.
Oh, cool.
And he wrote a book called The People-Pleasing Pastor. And
Yeah.
and one of the things he gets into is that there's this psychological concept of wanting to be liked, and
Codependency.
if you allow that to overwhelm your personality, you're more susceptible to the things like you said, drinking or drugs or
Yeah.
porn or whatever, because when you're always seeking to be accepted, when you're always seeking to be liked, then you're not able to lead. You're not able
Yeah.
to be honest with people,
Right.
because conflict. If you're driving forces, I want you to like me. The last thing you want to do is,
Go against that.
be a conflicting person. So,
Yeah.
they find themselves retreating into bad things because
True
it's,
story.
like you said, a coping mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah. Numbers may have changed, Richard. So back when I was in ministry, someone like Dr. Stone, is that what you
Yeah.
said? His name?
Yeah.
Said, and not him, but someone like him said that roughly 50% of the pastors in America are codependent. They need to be needed. They like to be liked. And at that time, the average church in America was 111 people. And last I saw, that number is down to 96 and probably dwindling. And that's partly like, again, I may feel called, but if my people start talking to you, I need to get rid of you because now you're taking some of my thunder away. And I am absolutely convinced that one of the restrictions to churches reaching more people is I need to be needed. I need to be liked. Anyone with power, ability that could really help me go somewhere threatens me. So I get rid of them. And yet one of the greatest things a pastor needs in their life is a strong personality who can say, I need to talk to you about this. What's going on? And so, yeah, I agree with this insight for sure.
Yeah, I think and I think it's been exacerbated by COVID. One of the struggles a lot of pastors, and I don't think it's just pastors, I think it's leaders in general. There's it's lonely at the top. That phrase has been around for generations, and there's a lot of truth in it. That's why it
Yeah.
persists. And then with pastors, you kind of throw on a little something extra because they're by their position required to keep confidences on certain things
Yeah.
when they're counseling and when people have shared with them very personal things. And
Yeah.
loneliness, I think, can be one of the most destructive things any human being can go through, because
Agree.
it leaves you susceptible to getting in your own head, if you will, and allowing your demons to just chew you up. And
Yeah.
and then with COVID, the lack of, And if anybody doesn't know we're in Virginia Beach, they may hear the jets going overhead. Well,
I hear them.
that's because all the F-18s train here, so it's a regular occurrence. I don't know if that's getting picked up by the mic or not, but I think with COVID, it's exacerbated the problem of the loneliness for many
Yeah,
leaders because they're
yeah,
not even getting that human contact, which a lot of them thrive on. Like you said,
yeah,
you come alive in the room. I think many leaders are that way, that they're extroverts or they gain something from being amongst people and working with people, and the isolation that COVID brings is real piling on.
yeah, yeah. I try to help. Like for me, I'm in my dining room, which could be my office, which could be my dining room, with and so a lot of people, there are no boundaries now between work and private life. And so I work with my clients to help them clean those lines up. And for a pastor, I mean, he may do his sermon from this chair.
Right.
And so it's not only work, it's the pulpit and all. And you don't have healthy work-life balances, let alone social balances. And like again, go back a generation, Richard, and pastors were always told, don't get too close to your parishioners, right? You need to keep this gap. Don't get, and in a real unhealthy way, that's been embraced. And so in one way we mirror like, no, we're good, man. We're close, and on the other side is like, but you don't know anything about me and I will never. And so we have these really weird beliefs or practices in ministry to where I may not get close to the parishioners, even though I did. I at least need to be close to another pastor or a CEO, COO, somebody who can have a high level conversation with me and be okay with wherever it goes, as opposed to wanting to dumb it down to, let me talk to you about the first song you chose Sunday,
Right.
So
No, I think you're definitely on to something there, because no matter what your position, you do need somebody that you can connect with. I
yeah,
mean, I think from a pastor's standpoint or a leader in any way, there. I mean, if it's corporate, because I've been in that position where, to be tough on people, sometimes you don't want to be their best friend, but
yeah,
you have to have an intimacy that goes beyond, this is my office, that's your desk,
yeah,
never shall we, cross paths. Um, so there has to be a familiarity at least,
yeah,
an understanding of who they are, what motivates them, and what makes them tick. It concerns me greatly, if a pastor doesn't want to have a closeness with those that he's supposed to be leading. I mean,
agree.
to me, that just seems so contradictory.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that a lot of us seek that out. I think. Well, let me just go a little further. Like an even greater addition to that is when if you're married, you and your spouse can find a couple that both of you mesh with and can be out. Because again, like it's not unusual for the man to connect with but doesn't like the woman, or the woman, and you
Right.
like Sean, she has her friend, and when you have a couple that you can both be out with and be real and be accountable and have real conversations, it's not just about Bob, it's not about Sean, it's about our home, our family, our marriage, our ministry, all of it. And I would, any minister that ends up watching this, I would highly encourage some of the things we're touching on right now to not let them be just stuff they digest and move on. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting, and I think we touched on it earlier, that, the more people you meet in the world and in your life, there are some people that are kind of like us, that, we'll just be bulls and just be brutally honest and
Yeah.
just say it like it is, and this is what I believe, and damn
Yeah.
the torpedoes. But there are some people that I find that you know they would rather not address you know truths in the world because either they don't want to offend others or they just find life goes on a little bit more pleasantly if they don't dig in beyond the surface. To me, that's
Yeah.
frustrating, and I have those conversations with people. I'm like, I don't like cocktail party talk. I like to talk
Yeah.
about things that have meaning,
Have
and
some
to my
traction.
detriment, I think sometimes I need to get better at small talk, and sometimes I just always want to have the red meat.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but for those that never get below the surface, I just don't know where the fulfillment comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's probably like, some people may never have money, so they don't know what they're missing. And like in that, people, a lot of us grew up in shallow or family stuff we don't talk about, and you just perpetuate that, and
Right.
it never gets brought up. It's don't ask, don't tell, and you deal with your stuff, I'll deal with, all of that. And but
Yeah.
once you learn how to have some meaningful conversation, and wow, we're still friends, you still like me, we're still okay. um, it's kind of like you can't go back to being poor now. Like you tasted wagyu, and it's better than regular
Better than
stuff.
butt steak. Yeah.
100%. So yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for spending a little time with us today. I appreciate it. I think people get a lot out of your insights. And uh, I believe, why don't you just say what your website is so people, if they want to dig into what Bob Groves has to offer, they can find you.
Yeah, the easiest one, I have a few, but bobgroves.com would
Okay.
be the easiest one.
Okay.
Email me at bob@bobgroves.com
Well,
would
that's
be
about
the
as easy
easiest
as it gets.
places to find me.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, some of us have to keep it simple, man.
One thing I like to do is give you an opportunity, a minute or two, to just share whatever is on your heart or mind, or any advice you want to give. So I'll just turn the mic and camera over to you for a minute or two and let you go.
Yeah, well, nothing top of mind. First off, thank you for this. Like, I appreciate having a chance to share and add value to somebody. So thank you for that. And the second thing is, life is short, no matter what. And, here you go. Here's how I'll wrap it up. So my mom passed a couple years ago from dementia. And I read when she passed that the average person in America lives for 30,000 days. So I looked it up. That's roughly 82 and some change, 82 years. At that time, I was going into my final 10,000 days. And so I asked my wife a couple Christmases ago for 10,000 pennies, $100 in pennies. And I got it. She actually gave me 10,000 pennies, 55 pounds of pennies. It's a lot of pennies. And I put them in a jar, and I got a jar just like it that's empty. And every day, Richard, the first thing I do every morning is I go to that jar. And I reach into the jar with the penny and I take it out. This will mess with me a little bit. And I reflect on yesterday. How'd I do? Did I show up? Did I make eye contact? Did I have deep conversation? Did I matter? Right? Did I add value? And then I'll reflect on the day that I have. That's all I have. I have a meeting with Richard. I have this, I have that. And it's like, help me to be a better me than I was yesterday, to show up, to make a difference, to matter, to squeeze the juice out of today. And then I drop the penny in the empty jar. And it's my way of realizing, like, time is getting shorter. And if I get all my 30,000, hey, I'm game. You know, someone's asked me, what are you going to do when you get to the last penny? I'm like, celebrate. Like, you know, I
I'm going
mean,
to dump the old pennies back in.
I'll start over again,
Yeah.
but I hope I do get them all. But if I don't, it's my way of this little icon of saying, make today matter, because, you know, we put off so much stuff of living. It can't wait till next year. Wait till I live, just live. I don't want to die with excuses and regrets. I don't want to die with my freaking baggage carrying it. I want to make a difference today. And I would encourage everyone, find a way of making every day matter, and don't put off. Don't put off. So,
Well, I
yeah.
think that's a great message to end on. And
Well, thank you,
I
buddy.
thank you again.